Many, many thanks, James, for coming, and thanks to other River Action. And I think the rapid growth of River Action over the last couple of years has really shown why we need this tonight. So,
thanks, Chris. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to give you a little introduction to our work as an organisation, but our work as a group, and I mean our in the broadest sense across our nation. Not to put too fine a point on it, we are in a freshwater emergency. We're gathered here today because we have to be here. We're gathered here because you in Oxford have realised quite a long time ago, including people in this room, that it's not actually safe to swim in the river often. It's not safe to row even in the river. If you have an open wound, you don't wipe your blades down, etc., you might find yourself in hospital. Just recently we discovered a gentleman on the River Kennet, where I live. I grew up in Bradfield, incidentally, just downstream from you guys. And he was hospitalised with sepsis not long ago. So it's a very, very serious condition that our river faces. It should come with a health risk, I think, many days of the year. So what's River Action about? We're a campaigning group. We were established a couple of years ago, and we cut our teeth on the River Wye. And that was targeting the intensive poultry unit industry. As I'm sure many of you will have read about, there are about 25 million birds at any one time, and all the guano, the manure, of those hens are spread liberally on the fields that then wash into the river. And even though there are the farming rules for water, they have only been applied once in 6 years since their inception. So we can see an industry that is based upon an international business model by a company called Avara that's owned by Cargill, that many of you know, probably one of the world's biggest food corporations, and destroyers of the Amazon rainforest, I should add. All that soy that feeds the chickens comes from the Amazon as well. So it's a really quite frankly disgusting business model that's been exported from the United States to our country. And in so doing, we're seeing huge amounts of excess phosphates and nitrates running into the river. And it's causing algal blooms that have turned it into a stinking greeny brown ditch. And consequently, if you're an Atlantic salmon, the chances of you finding a spawning ground are very slim now. There are some species that are just about hanging on, but the ranunculus, the beautiful waterweed that we see, they refer to it as like maiden's hair in medieval literature and so on, gone, 95% of it gone. And that's the basis of the food chain. There's nowhere for insects, invertebrates and so on to live that feed the fish and the amphibians and so on. So what we're seeing is effectively ecocide. And according to Lancaster University, that could be as soon as 2 years' time. And by my measure, personally, I'd say we're pretty much close to it right now. Why has this happened? Well, there is no regulation. There is nothing to hold those companies accountable. And we have a supply chain that's demanding cheap meat and eggs. So companies like Tesco's, only about 1p in the pound of profits, or 9p in the pound that we spend in shops, goes to farmers. So they literally can't afford to manage their slurry properly, and there aren't the rules being enforced. So we're taking the government to court. On the 28th and 29th of February, you may join us if you wish to protest outside the High Court, where we will be making it very clear that the Environment Agency has failed to do its job. We'd like to do the same with Natural Resources Wales on the other side of the river. So that's how we cut our teeth. And what did we do? Well, we recognised the systemic nature of the problem, tried to identify where the perpetrators originate and how it all works as a system, and then target each of those. Avara, the big food company I mentioned, Noble Foods, another one, Tesco's and so on, and also galvanise the local community. And we go to serve. We don't go to tell, we go to listen. And I appreciate that right at this moment you're listening to me, but that's just to start the conversation. We're here to try and offer our help. That might be funding. It's typically campaigning advice. We are very much a campaigning organisation. I hope that most of you would have seen at least some of the work we and others have been doing in the media recently. Indeed, just some of yourselves have been involved in it. So we also do science. And of course, in order for organisations to listen and for the government to be able to base their decisions, there needs to be evidence. But we see citizen science not only as filling this massive gap in regulation that the Environment Agency is failing to do, and incidentally, we haven't got anything against the Environment Agency. It's not their fault they lost 70% of their funding in the past 13 years of this government. How can you possibly regulate if you don't have the staff and the resources? And even if you did have the evidence, how are you going to go and take them to court if you can't afford to do so? So when it comes to citizen science, we see it as a way for both gathering the evidence, but also galvanizing communities, getting people like ourselves who live close to rivers, who are river users, to be able to measure and understand the source of the problem, but also then use that to bring support around them within their families, their businesses, their friends, and so on. And then in addition to that, and the illegal action I mentioned, targeting industry, it's about making a lot of noise. So the wild woman of the Wye, Angela Jones, a heroic woman who is swimming and still swims every day in the river, putting her own health at risk, towing giant poos behind her and egg cases which say crappy eggs rather than happy eggs on them, gaining the national media attention with help from people like us to make sure her story's told, not ours but hers. She's resisting the water company and refusing to pay her bill. There's a lot of civil resistance going on right now, and of course we as a charity can't comment on that, but I as an individual can say, good for you, go and do whatever you require, is required, but within the law, of course. So that's how we help a community like that. Make sure that evidence is there, understand the problem, and then take it to the media. Fast forward to last Christmas. I went for a walk along the River Thames. As I mentioned, I grew up nearby in Bradfield with a guy called Dave Wallace, no relation, and we had a little chat. It turns out that he was swimming in a race in Henley, and whilst he was racing along, a turd went past him. And that has happened to him, it's happened to Laura, it has happened to many people who swim in the river. Laura's from the Henley Mermaids, and I'm sure if she's given the chance, we'll tell you other stories about how it is inappropriate and totally unacceptable to be putting your health at risk to be able to enjoy the leisure of the river you live on. So Dave and I were having a chat, and we realised that actually there's quite a lot we could be doing here together. We already have groups like Henley Mermaid. We have the wonderful Windrush Against Sewage Pollution that many of you will know, and we're already very much involved in the bathing water status application that Ned mentioned. Groups like that coming together, with us bringing a bit of finance, telling some stories. What do? We organised a couple of meetings. We had one in the town hall with about 100 people, including members of the British rowing team, the Henley Regatta and so on, the town council. So very similar to tonight, but perhaps a little bit bigger, more public, let's say. And out of that, we agreed what we'd like to do together, which was to start a campaign to target Thames Water, because we all knew, it was very clear that Thames Water are the main culprits. And although that's very useful, we also know that they're the culprits here, and they've already been targeted and engaged. And in Henley, that means doing things very politely and respectfully, because it's very much a Henley way of doing things. There's a brand and an international reputation to protect, but also it seems appropriate to start those conversations, always very politely and respectfully, with evidence, making sensible and reasonable demands. That's all we're suggesting, really. At the same time, some protests going on, some quite vociferous work in the media. People like Sir Steve Redgrave joining us when we discovered through our citizen science programme that on the 20th of June, just before the start of the Henley Regatta, there was 4 times the base level of E. coli in the water. Now, we happen to know there wasn't an illegal discharge just before then, so it's likely that came just from the normal effluent from the water treatment works. And I wouldn't be surprised if many in this room don't know that it's not a legal requirement to remove bacteria from treated effluent. So what looks like water coming out of any sewage treatment works across the country is actually likely to be full of intestinal enterococci and E. coli, all of which can hospitalise or in weak people kill and lead to things like sepsis, like that gentleman I mentioned earlier. So this is normal business. This isn't just when it rains or when they can't be bothered to invest in our infrastructure and a leak happens, or a discharge rather. This happens all the time. So, having galvanised the community, brought them together and had quite an invigorating evening, we wrote a letter to the chief executives, who incidentally changed overnight from 1 person to 2 as one walked out and 2 probably didn't enjoy taking her job. And we started to engage much more broadly. We had Steve Backshaw getting involved, and we made some films with him, and using people like that who have a big reputation and a following, as I'm sure you already have done and would probably like to do in the future. In Oxford, there will definitely be people with a name who have a following who we could bring in if we choose, or rather you choose with our support, to develop this campaign. So, having demonstrated there's a big problem with E. coli, that there's excess levels of phosphates and nitrates as well, some of which will come from agriculture, but we're pretty convinced that around Henley, and probably true with Oxford, a lot of it will be from sewage. We then have thought, right, what next? We've made a bit of a splash, we've made some films, we've got a lot of support within the community, we've got all the main rowing clubs involved, we have British rowing involved, Swim England and British canoeing, fantastic. All of whom came to the events and all of whom has signed up to the Charter for Rivers. The Charter for Rivers was written by River Action and then supported by, I think, Friends of the Earth, but definitely Greenpeace and WWF and all the others, to then demonstrate to the manifesto writing teams in all the party headquarters to put river and water health at the top of their their manifesto priorities, just as much as education, energy, and law and enforcement, for example. So with the Rivers Charter and the Henny campaign, we then started working with some groups who are doing some quite fun things, like paddling down the river. Tim and Ben paddled from the source all the way down to the Westminster Bridge, and then joined us at number 10, handing in a petition with 106,000 signatures, some of whom may be in the room, and the charter with those 70 supporters to be able to say, enough is enough. Our demands are this: healthy rivers for people and nature by 2030. That seems quite reasonable to me. Now, we're not naive enough to think that all the sewage treatment works in this country are going to be sorted out by then, but we would like to see the commitments in place, plans and action, and many things underway. In addition to that, let's not forget that alongside water quality, there's water quantity. So when I said earlier on, perhaps boldly, that we're facing a freshwater emergency, what we mustn't forget is we are running out of water. Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Look at Guildford. If you have a GU postcode and you were in the room tonight, you will be thirsty. That's not a very nice thought, particularly when there was literally water everywhere and we're having heavy rainfall. What happened there? The Thames water treatments work at Shalford had a power cut. There was no redundancy built in. There is literally nothing apart from tankers and hundreds of thousands of bottles of water. So 20,000 people, schools and so on, have had to close down, and people have gone thirsty. And if you're a vulnerable person, what does that mean to you if you can't get out and someone's not there to help you? People will die from this, whether you've been swimming and you've got sepsis or E. coli, or whether you've died, dare I say it, of thirst. This is happening right now on our government's watch. I'm not here to preach or lecture, I'm here to start the conversation. I hope that's given you enough of a bit of a taster to understand what we do. I've mentioned some of the organisations. There's also Thames 21 in the room, Windrush, who can't be here, and others who are working together. So when I'm here, I'm speaking not only on behalf of my colleagues, but also a group of us who've got together and said, right, we're here to help. What can we do? So what we would like to propose for tonight is to be able to say to ourselves, well, you've done a fantastic things at Wolvercote getting bathing water status, and downstream from here, the Henley community likewise are beginning to stand up and make some noise with success. We'd like to propose that we could together develop a Thames campaign from Oxford, or perhaps Cricklade, Oxford, Henley, Wallingford, Reading, Caversham, where the British Rowing headquarters are, and incidentally we're developing a partnership now, including Earthwatch, Rivers Trust and so on, with British Rowing, so that we can help rowers to become better educated, safe, and also test water. We're having conversations with Henley Regatta. We would love to speak to the university about the Eights weekend and rowing clubs, and we would love to talk to, in fact have started to, with the boat race, so we could have Oxford and Cambridge. Now imagine this as a scenario. We have a general election probably in around this time next year. No one knows for certain, but it's probably around 12 or 11 months from now. Imagine we together with other communities up and downstream from here have gathered together, brought the evidence that we need, targeted the polluters, mainly Thames Water, the regulators, the Environment Agency, and Ofwat, because they have a role to play here. They're the pricing regulator that allow water companies to spend or not their money, our money, on fixing their networks. And to go to candidates of the mayoral election, candidates, parties and individuals for the general election, and with existing politicians like Leila Moran here, who I've already spoken to about this, I know is supportive of this meeting, to be able to say, we have had enough and we need to see change, and we are going to vote for change when it comes to the election. And we're going to not let you sleep, Thames Water, until you make it safe for us to be in this river, or to even know that we're going to have water when things start to really get hot and stormy in this country, which is anything to go by in recent history. We could be looking at next summer, the summer after, next winter, maybe this winter. None of us know. We are totally and utterly unprepared as a nation and as a city and a broader community for climate breakdown, and it's happening right now.